Well, good evening and welcome to Summer Studies Session 2015. This is I'm David Kulieke, and I am the current chair of the Education Committee, which has been putting these gatherings together for about 4 decades, and they're for the intention of intensive study, fellowship, and all of this leading to a closer sense of relationship with each other and with God. And I'm glad you're all here. God the Father loves men. God the Son serves men. God the Spirit inspires the children of the universe to the ever-ascending adventure of finding God the Father by the ways ordained by God the Son through the ministry of the grace of God the Spirit. How many people know that? I see a lot of First Society people, but that's been often referred to as the benediction. It's the last paragraph of paper 3. It's one of those references in the Urantia book that in just a small compass manages to say so much and say it so beautifully. It tells us of the relationship, at least the productive relationship, the functional relationship of the various members of the Trinity. It tells us of how they relate to our purpose in this universe age, the age of supremacy, the age of experience and striving. Our relationship with God, which you may remember is a little bit to do with our topic here, is, among other things, a partnership. We're told in paper 118 that it becomes increasingly apparent that creatures, even men, are to become God's partners in the realization of finality of destiny. The watchword of the universe is progress. And for us, that means experience, and it means development, it means growth, it means step by step, maybe sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but moving towards the perfection that can only be achieved through experience. It means going from cloud to God and slime to sublime. It's an inside joke, but I always wanted to put it in a speech. Slime to sublime. It's not actually in the, well, it's in one of my books because I wrote it down, but it's not actually printed in the book. One of the ways that we do this, and I might be slightly prejudiced here, is through education. In fact, I would go on to say that probably you could encompass just about every way that we grow towards paradise as being part of education. We're told that education is the business of living. And they're referring to, in this particular context, to living on this planet in this life, but I think you could expand that to talk about our entire journey to paradise. Education is the business of living. It must continue throughout a lifetime so that mankind may gradually experience the ascending levels of mortal wisdom, which are, and what I want you to notice about this list is how developmental it is, very reflective of the wisdom of people like the developmental psychologists of the 50s and 60s, which are still, I think, relevant to what we talk about. There are taxonomies like this list hundreds of times throughout the Urantia book. So the levels of mortal wisdom are 1, the knowledge of things, 2, the realization of meanings, 3, the appreciation of values, 4, the nobility of work, duty, 5, the motivation of goals, morality, 6, the love of service, character, and 7, cosmic insight, spiritual discernment. Now, those, you can tell, are growing, they're organic, they build from one level to another. One of the things that I've noticed as a teacher is that as you do build from one level of a taxonomy to a higher level, you don't give up the earlier ones, you go back to them and you keep them and you savor them. So, as we are learning, we know we are doing it to eventually yield the growth of an individual so that person can relate better and can know God better. But we're going to continue to put that in the context of learning as well. After all, they did give us a book. And what we're doing here this weekend, and this is what I wish and I hope and for every one of you, I think according to the Urantia book, it wouldn't be quite appropriate to say pray, but I'm going to say wish and hope, is to be able to develop your insight of the wisdom that comes from the book a little better, to enhance your relationships and the fellowship with the people around you, especially if you haven't met some of them, and eventually to come a little closer to God. And so maybe this weekend can be our tiny little bit of contributing to that experience. So what I would like to do is acknowledge people who have contributed to this. I'm doing this in the tradition of my wife. She's doing better, everybody's asking me. She's been home with pneumonia in the last couple of days, which is why she's not here. So Marilyn always congratulates the cook before she eats. And I've often wondered if she does that so she can be on the safe side of things and not have to worry about it after she's eaten, because maybe it wouldn't be able to go anywhere like that. So I want to congratulate the people who have worked on this before we find out if it's going to turn out the way they hoped. And I'm going to leave some people out, but first, could I just ask any member or adjunct of the Education Committee to stand up? I'll do it. And don't forget that we're meeting over lunch on Saturday. You want to get that in. Anybody who is giving a workshop in the next 2 days, now you're going to stand up in a second, but everyone who's ever given a workshop knows two things. You learn more than anybody else in the workshop, and you spend hundreds of hours preparing for it. So these people deserve respect. I am too. Stand up. And I'd like to say there is less arm twisting this year than in most years. I'd like to say it. It's an old joke, but you have to use it when it fits. A few basic things that I want to pass on to you. John Coslin always has an announcement. Apparently, I guess, there's a relative conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. I said, that was intentional. John likes to be the expert. I wanted to give him the opportunity. This happened 2,000 years ago. You know about that one. So what'll happen this time? Probably nothing, but John is going to have 2 telescopes in the parking lot tonight. So you can look and see if there's any incoming. And
we'll probably, Jupiter appears will have set about 11, but Saturn is coming up. So we could be out there picking letters.
Your workshop is tomorrow, John. He didn't get it. Okay. We will have plenaries twice a day, a little more spontaneous than the plenaries at night. I'd also like to point out, one other thing before I point this last thing out. We're not having a bookstore this time, but you can buy Urantia books of both flavors in the lobby if you need one. So we'll have them there for sale, because after all, this is an educational workshop for the Urantia, to make a point. And then one last thing I want to point out here. There's several special things going on. This is not to draw anybody away from any of the academic or in-depth study workshops, but there are 4 experiential workshops, we call them. Tomorrow morning, we'll start with the second ever study group conclave, which will talk about what study groups can do for outreach, and then we're going to have a mini workshop so the Education Committee can talk to you about some of the things that we want to reinforce as far as sound education is concerned. In the afternoon, we're having anybody who's interested in doing education from the Urantia book in various ways for children. And I know a lot of people are very passionate about this, and we wanted to give a chance for those people to get together and talk and exchange materials and perspectives. On Saturday morning, we have an introductory session for people who are new to the book or fairly new to the book. And I really hope if you know somebody who is still learning that we get them there, because we reach out to people in this community, and we also thought there was going to be a whole bushel full of teenagers here, and stuff happened. So if you have family members that have traveled with you and they'd like to know what the heck you're doing here, this would be a good opportunity. I know it's going to be very, very good. I'd really like for people, if you know anybody at all who would like to know more about the Urantia book, try to get them there, okay? And then a tech review, what's going on with the various organizations in the afternoon on Saturday. Then Saturday night, we're moving upstairs to the 5th floor, and we are having the 60th celebration anniversary party. And this is an anniversary both of the beginning of Urantia Brotherhood and, more importantly, of the publication of the Urantia book. So we thought, what the heck, we should do something about this, and we are. And people can just come to that. There's no registration fee or anything, so if you know anybody that would like to come, please get them there. We're looking forward to seeing all of you there. The mommy of the education committee, the woman who stands behind me with a knitting needle if I'm not moving well enough. Also known as Silverlocks. That's another name. Bobbie Dreier is going to introduce Gard Jameson, who's going to introduce God.
Before the Urantia book was a revelation for me, I saw its truths alive in a few people. Among them was Gard Jameson, whose generosity of spirit and power of persistence changed my life. For years, Gard encouraged me to try something called centering prayer. But it wasn't until 15 years ago at a conference in Staten Island that I understood that there was something wrong with me if I didn't have 20 minutes a day to spend with my loving Father in heaven. I accepted the divine invitation. I've taken it pretty much every day since then. And what a gift. Thank you, God. He also encouraged me to attend prayerful meditations at conferences, and before long had me doing pre-conference retreats with him. Recently, we have held pre-conference circles of trust, where we have the privilege of spending prayerful time with others to support each other in our Godward quest. It has been an amazing adventure. Thank you, Gard. In his private life, Gard is very accomplished, but I'm sure he thinks that his greatest accomplishment is his relationship with his beautiful wife, Florence, and his children, Michael and Julia. It gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce my brother and my dear, dear friend, Gard Jameson.
Bobbie, you are such a joy. I have titled my talk tonight, Thunder of Silence, but it's also subtitled, oh my, this is actually tracked by a speaker, Field Notes of a Fellow Sojourner. Muchas gracias, Diaz. It's been 43 years in the field, and there have been a few of you that have been along for the ride for all 43 years. And I look around and I see my roommate, Jeff Waddles, who has been with me, and we've experienced some tremendous ups and some tremendous downs. I like to say this 43 years has been a little bit, some of us remember Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Quite exciting at times. And I remember 1975, I believe, was at Kendall College. And this young Jewish fellow got up and he sat down in a chair without prepared speeches and without prepared things on the screen. And he began to talk to us about wisdom and about the nature of God and about the nature of consciousness. Steve Dreier, what a rebel. And it was 1993, and it just, my dear daughter Julia put me on Facebook 2 years ago. And so it's been a very interesting thing. I thought I was really progressive by doing email, David, but this Facebook thing I'm becoming familiar with. But somebody posted a picture. I don't know if it was you, my dear friend Paula. Where are you, Paula? But a 1993 picture of a group of individuals at the 1993 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, celebrating the centennial of the Parliament there in Chicago. And what an exquisite experience we had there to meet Hans Kung and the Dalai Lama and such a wide variety of spiritual individuals. And we were quite humbled at that event because we realized we had a lot of growth to do to catch up to these spiritual giants walking the planet. One of them, my teacher, Thomas Keating. But this Parliament of World Religions was an extraordinary taste of the possibility of light and life on this planet. And this October, for those of you that may be interested, thanks to the work of Christina Seaborn. Where's Christina? We have 5 or 6 presentations at the World Parliament of Religion. So exciting. I remember the first one. Remember, Paula? We were bootlegging. And we found a little room in the back and we made up brochures, and we weren't on the formal program, but we gave them out to everybody and said, would you like to know about the 5th epoch of Revelation? And we had a small cadre of people there, and what a joyous experience. And so as I look around and I see so many familiar faces, I recognize that on this wild ride, right, Linda, that this wild ride has just begun. And you're going to hear a little poem tonight by John O'Donohue at the end about new beginnings. And I want to share tonight that for me, the great insight is that every moment is a new beginning. And I think there is a sea change happening in the Urantia community. I think something extraordinary is beginning to emerge. There is, if you will, the wings of a butterfly beginning to emerge from the cocoon. And right, John Callahan, it's about time. And so we're really excited. I'm excited as a trustee of Urantia Foundation to see the new things that are emerging. It was last year at Amherst that David Kulieke and Sheila Keen-Lund and I gave a joint educational program calling forth the unity within our community. And Carolyn Kendall, are you here? I saw her at dinner. I think she's gone back home. But Carolyn Kendall, at the 50th celebration of this great revelation, suggested to us that it was said once upon a time that until 90% of us find unity of purpose within our community, the angels will have a very difficult time propagating this revelation. So as we contemplate this weekend, what is the charge? The charge is for all of our communities, all of our organizations, to put our house together, and to put it together in such a way as that we glorify God in everything that we think, say, and do. So I'm reminded of a friend of mine who is a monastic. It's a place a little bit like this, and he was only actually what we call a 3-year monastic. And when he went in, he had these grand expectations of what monasticism would bring to his life and how he would be able to contribute to the world. But this was a very disciplined and strict place. And so you were only allowed to say 2 words at the end of each year. And so at the end of the first year, they asked Brother John to come in, and the abbot was there, and And he said, Brother John, it's been such a lovely experience having you here for the last year. What are your 2 words this year? And Brother John looked at the abbot with a little bit of a scowl, and he said, bed hard. Well, the abbot, not to be daunted, said, well, we'll look into that, Brother John, and we'll see what we can do. And I look forward to our conversation next year. And so the year went by, and sure enough, Brother John was asked in, and the abbot looked at him and said, John, so how are we doing this year? And John looked at the abbot again, a little bit of a scowl, and he said, food cold. Well, the abbot was a very cheerful fellow, and not to be daunted again. And he said, well, okay, we're going to look into that one too. Thank you very much. We appreciate the feedback of the monks. I really look forward to talking to you next year. And so sure enough, the 3rd year came by, and Brother John was brought in, and he sat down, and there was the abbot, and the abbot looked him in the eye with a great grin on his face, and he said, well, with a little trepidation, how are we doing this year, Brother John? Brother John looked at him and he said, I quit. The monastic life is tough. It is a life of discipline. It is a life of silence. At the 93 Parliament, I met an incredible, what I call a spiritual giant. His name was Wayne Teasdale. He spent a good part of his life in southern India as part of an ashram there. And he wrote a book about being an ordinary monk in the world. Being an ordinary monk in the world. And I want to share with you, my brothers and sisters, my friends, that I think that's what we are called to be ordinary monks in the world. In other words, to live a life of discipline that allows us to touch the world in a sacred way with the quality of God's Spirit. I'm also reminded, actually, of a story which is a true story. My historian friend Sue Oliver will appreciate this. A true story of a Huron Indian who had just been converted and had been baptized, and he was told that he was now to take confession. And so he went into the confessional, and he gave his confession to the priest, and then after the confession was done, he was given the penances he should perform, and he got out of the confessional, and he went over to where the priest was, and he kind of took him by the hand, and he brought him around, and he sat him in the chair. And then he went around, and he sat in the confessional. And the priest said, my son, what are you, and this is a true story, Huron Indian, what are you doing? And the Huron Indian said, haven't you read Paul? It says, you should confess to one another. You've heard my confession, now it's time for me to hear your confession. Part of, I think, what we are experiencing at this moment is an opportunity to experience a deeper quality of trust in our community. And so that's why for the last couple of years, I've introduced something called Circles of Trust. I recommend to any of you a book called A Hidden Wholeness by Parker Palmer, who is from the Quaker tradition, and you may or may not know, but one of the individuals from whom ideas were shared in the Urantia book, Rufus Jones, one of the great Quakers of the 20th century, whose work in the First World War with remediation in Europe led to the Nobel Peace Prize for the Quaker community. But Rufus Jones suggests that there is an issue, and he's written a book not only about the soul, the division between soul and role, but also a book about saving our democracy. I had a wonderful meal with Dana, who was talking about the early days. Where are you, Dana? Talking about the early days of our democracy. And one of the stories is as Ben Franklin was leaving the Hall of Freedom there in Philadelphia, he was asked by one of the people observing, what kind of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin? And he was told by Mr. Franklin, a democracy, if you can keep it. And so we are in peril. Right now we're in peril because our institutions, whether they be political or economic or religious, are in some fashion imploding. In my own community of Southern Nevada, I reached out very recently to the Vicar General, the sort of COO of the Catholic Church in Southern Nevada, and I asked him whether or not it would be possible to share contemplative prayer, which is in our parlance synonymous with worship, in Christianity they call contemplative prayer. Would it be possible to share contemplative prayer with some of the parishes? And I was very quickly told, and he's a friend of mine, Father Bob, I was very quickly told, no, that would not be possible. I said, why is that? He said, because my priests have a hard enough time delivering the wafer and the wine. And I said to him, I feel, and I know him pretty well, I said, I feel a little bit like a chapter out of a book by the fellow named Dostoevsky called The Brothers Karamazov, the chapter you may know, The Grand Inquisitor, where Jesus was shown the door. But this is what's going on. And so right now in our culture, the number 2 category of people in relation to religion are, anybody know? Pew just did their survey. The nuns, N-O-N-E. None of the above. They're not interested in the institutions of religion. And we're told in our revelation that the institution of religion is relevant, and it needs to find new ground. There needs to be new inspiration breathed into it. Well, tonight I want to share with you how I think that may be possible. At least one observer's perspective from the field after 43 years on this wild ride. And I want to share this perspective both from a personal standpoint, also from an educational standpoint, as educational chair at the foundation. And I began the story with 2 signal events that happened to me in 1972. The first, I was in my dormitory, and I had just come back from a bookstore where I was reading Gurdjieff. Anybody know Gurdjieff? Yeah? See? Gurdjieff's not all that bad. Some of the people in our circle of trust were saying he was a pretty mean dude. Well, in certain ways he was, but he was trying to get people to wake up. But I was reading Gurdjieff, and I overheard a couple of individuals talking about the early life of Jesus. And I recognized quickly that this wasn't in the Bible, these stories. So I quickly picked up the book, went to my dorm room, put it on the shelf along with my other textbooks, and there was a knock on the door a few days later. And a young fellow student came up. His name is Brian Cox, some of you know him. And Brian said, Gard, I just had an experience over the last week which left me with this deep, intimate sense of God's presence, but I no longer have it, and I want to get it back into my life. Do you have any ideas of how this might happen? And very instinctively, I took the book from the shelf and I said, I think this book might help you. And so about a week later, Brian came back, knocked on the door, and looked me in the eye with this startled look and said, Gard, do you know what you have here? I said, a book? He said, no, you have a revelation. In the early days of the history of this revelation, there was actually, during the period of the Forum, there was actually a statement made, if you really knew what you have in your hands, you would be much more serious, much more engaged, much more curious, much more dedicated. And so we have something significant here. And so how do we get ourselves to the underbelly of this revelation? Well, that was the second event that happened in 1972, which was in my aunt and uncle's house. I was putting in fire alarm systems, and it was hot. My aunt and uncle had gone to the beach. I was alone, and I had just received news of a friend. His name is Lee Benjamin. And Lee and his patrol were walking on patrol in Vietnam. And they were on patrol, and there in front of them, 3 children, each with hand grenades in both hands, rushed his battalion. At the end, the 3 children lay in their blood. All of the battalion was killed except for Lee, who lost his leg. So in that moment, as that story moved into the depth of my heart, I asked the question, if there's anybody here I need to know. The rent's pretty high down here, and I'm not sure I can pay it anymore. And in that moment, in the very moment I asked the question, my soul was flooded with the experience of God's unconditional love. And so my tears of sorrow were turned into tears of joy. And I felt myself falling into a well, deeper and deeper and deeper into the arms of God. And I came out of that experience with the deep realization and awareness that God is unconditional love. If there's one thing I can say about God, at the end of the year I get 2 words: unconditional love. And so my journey from the field since that time, since 1972, like my friend Brian, has to increasingly recover a sense of that experience and to allow that in some fashion to manifest in my life and in my work and in my relationships. So I want to read to you a poem that we read during our Circles of Trust by Mary Oliver, a great poet of this current generation. It's called The Journey, and this has been my journey, and I'm sure many of you resonate with this. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice as you strode deeper and deeper into the world. So that poem really resonated, and Bobbie, thank you for bringing that poem to our Circles of Trust. Another poem for me that resonates, and it really is my kind of signature poem, is by Rainer Maria Rilke. And Rilke says, "I live my life in widening circles that stretch out across the world. I doubt that I shall ever reach the last of these circles, but I give my life to it. I circle the primordial tower. I circle God." And so for me, the experience of connecting with the adjuster and my friend George Thornberry, where are you? So many friends. George Thornberry really woke me up in his stories about the adjuster when he shared many, many years ago his experience of the adjuster. But my experience of the pre-personal adjuster, how many of you have wondered about that word, pre-personal? Is that it really is the ultimate expression of grace. Because pre-personal suggests that what we have here is a gracious God who is not only listening to us, but is really patient with us, in spite of ourselves. And what is the adjuster attempting to do? He's attempting to turn us into gracious, patient listeners. And so the thunder of silence is learning how to listen to the depths inside of us, learning how to touch that space. And so we have, who likes concentric circles in this audience? We have these concentric circles. And so Rilke says, "I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world." Well, we might say reach out across the universe. But those circles begin in the innermost circle. And we're told that the nucleus of personality, all right, this is a quiz. Jeff, you're not allowed to say because you're Mensa. Anybody, what's the and Marvin, you're not allowed to say either because anybody, the nucleus of personality. The nucleus of personality in the religion papers is the thought adjuster. Steve knew that, but he wasn't going to say anything because he's kind of a monastic. But the nucleus of personality is the thought adjuster. So the deepest space of who we are, the most powerful space, that space of unconditional love, of matchless goodwill, abounding love, and unfailing forgiveness, the signs of true sonship, of true daughterhood, is the adjuster who awaits patiently and graciously. And then around that is you, the person. And so in this journey that we're all on, we have to attend to the voice that is speaking inside. And we have to understand that that voice is speaking to us in many different ways, in many different levels, suggesting that we reach out to family and that we exude, if you will, a quality of gracious, loving patience and kindness within the context of our families, but that we not stop there. And so our service extends to community. And so in whatever way we can find in our own communities, I worked with sex-trafficked kids. My wife started a clinic at Juvenile Justice for kids that had been sex-trafficked. The other day she was in the clinic and a young 15-year-old was there, and my wife said, "You were here last year and I thought we had the conversation, you're never coming back here again." This young 14-year-old and her 12-year-old sister were out there on the streets. And the 15-year-old said, "Dr. Jameson, I have great news for you. I just violated my probation. Remember that dream you and I were talking about last year? I'm doing it. I'm becoming a beautician. I'm so excited. Thank you for inspiring me." And so in whatever fashion we find, we must each not only serve within the context of family, but also within the context of community. And Stephen Colbert, right? People ask me, do you watch Fox News? I watch a lot of Fox News, but through the eyes of Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart. Reality check, right? But as Stephen Colbert says, tip of the hat, wag of the tail, to all of you. Because this is a TDA, and many of you are here serving the Urantia community, and I want to thank you for what you do for this community. And again, let's put our house together. So this level is extremely important. But then we have the global community, and so those of you that are able to come to the Parliament and get a little taste of what's going on globally. At this Parliament, we're going to be talking about violence. We're going to be talking about women. There's a whole group of women coming from all over the planet to have a women's assembly. And by the way, guess what's happening within our community? There's a whole group of women that are getting together to have women's assemblies. Right? Lynn St. Pierre. And Katerina. Huh? We're doing this women's assembly. And Cecilia, you're doing a women's assembly. Jimmy Carter said it. 5 Palestinian mothers, 5 Israeli mothers who have lost children, and you will have a peace plan that will last forever. So while we were in Israel last December, I took my kids and my wife. We had the most glorious time, but we had the opportunity to meet a Palestinian and an Israeli mother who had lost children. And it was interesting because they were at an interfaith event, a peace event. And at 1 a.m., Elena, the Israeli mother, said, "Ibtisam, are you asleep?" Ibtisam said, "No." Elena said, "I can't sleep because I'm sleeping in a room with a woman who wants to kill me." Ibtisam, who is Palestinian, said, "I can't sleep either because I'm in a room with a woman who wants to kill me." They are now the best of friends. It comes down to loving relationships and the worship of God. The worship of God. So we begin that inner journey with worship. Worship is the key. Now Jeff and I have maybe a little different opinion on this, but the 7 adjunct mind spirits, I want to say, the spirit of what comes before the spirit of what? At 6 and 7?
Worship.
In my own study group, tomorrow you have study group conclave. In my own study group, we take 5 minutes at the beginning of my study group to worship. And what I will tell you, absolutely empirically proven, is that the focus and clarity of my study group is greatly enhanced by that quality of silence, the thunder of silence. And so we have this global community, and what we also know as the Urantia community is that we have the privilege of serving a universe community. We have the opportunity to engage with archangels who want to do things on this planet. They want to get things done in education. They want to get things done in healthcare. They want to get things done on this planet. But guess what they need? Our hands and our feet. And so, however we do this, we each need to, in some fashion, find ourselves touching these widening circles that reach out across a vast universe. I want to share with you 2 pieces which Jeff knows I love the idea of personality, right? We're told in the Urantia book that personality is the supreme revelation of God to the universe. And there are 3 dimensions to personality. There's a vertical, there's a breadth, and there's length to personality. 3 dimensions to personality. This is very interesting. Suggesting what? That we need to take a vertical journey in our own journey. And how do we take that vertical journey? By committing ourselves every day to making a divine appointment. Right, Bobbie?
Absolutely.
And we say, right, my teacher Thomas Keating says, once a day for maintenance, twice a day for improvement, and occasionally, if you can, right, Marvin, we take a silent retreat for 5 days, and we swim in the delicious silence of God. We did this just recently in California. And so these dimensions represent, if you will, our work as a community. So worship is not only a privilege, it's also a what? Duty in the universe. And as we convert or transform duty into a joy, we realize that it never was a duty. It was always a joy. Joy is inherent in human existence. It is for us to discover it. And the horizontal is the quality of loving relationships that we have. And to, in some fashion, by touching each of those circles, to enhance the loving relationships of all the other circles, as David said. It's a developmental model. And each circle is, if you will, a hold-on of the other circles. And so we have this opportunity to touch the deepest places in our personality. And by doing so, we engage the journey. The journey. So I was sharing with some of you at the age of 20, my father, who was a very interesting man, right, Jeff? We called him larger than life, Big Frank. And my father at the age of 20 said, Gard, I want to take you on a really special birthday party when you're 21. I want to take you to Las Vegas. Well, my father's the only one that ever got a ticket for going down Las Vegas Boulevard at 25 miles an hour at 2 a.m. in his bathrobe, in reverse, drunk, with a woman in the back who wasn't mom. Mitigating circumstances. As he told the arresting officer, the forward gear does not work. So I knew why my father, this voice, was asking me to go to Las Vegas, and I politely said no. Thank you very much, no thank you. And so we have this longitudinal, which becomes a kind of a wild ride. How many, Paula, has it been a wild ride? Mr. Toad's wild ride? How about Mrs. Toad's wild ride? Yeah. It's been a wild ride. But would you trade it for anything else in the entire universe? Any other planet you would like to have been on? No. What an exquisite privilege to be here engaged in this journey. So 3 teachers for me are significant. Sir Hubert Wilkins, Henry Beckerman, and Clyde Bedell. Sir Hubert Wilkins, I didn't actually know him because he died before my time, but he said something about the Urantia book which really caught my attention. He was one of the great explorers of the 20th century. And if you want to see a picture of him, he's actually on YouTube, You Bet My Life. Anybody know who was the moderator of You Bet My Life? Groucho Marx, right? And he said it's utter consistency. And so what we see revealed in the Urantia book from page 1 all the way through the end are these incredible patterns, these crystalline patterns, which are expressed in so many exquisite ways, different ways. We say the liquid liberties of sonship, huh? We shouldn't formalize anything here. We shouldn't creedalize it. It should be, if you will, from our heart. Only a heart can speak to a heart. Henry Beckerman, who in his study group, if he got through a paragraph, he was lucky. Henry Beckerman valued each and every word in the book, and he valued the sequence of paragraphs, and he valued the sequence of sections, and he valued the sequence of papers. And so for us in our in-depth study, to really understand and appreciate, we have something really extraordinary here that really has a sequencing, that really has a wording that's absolutely miraculous, right? Einstein said only 2 people in the world, those who see the miracle and those who don't. You've been given a divine invitation, and that boils your choices to just 2. You can come dressed for dancing, or you can be carried in by the pallbearers. We've been given this opportunity to see the miracle of it all. The last is Clyde Bedell. Clyde Bedell, 1973, in West LA, admonished all of us in the audience to read paper 140 once a month. Paper 140, what's that paper? Ordination. So the ordination is all about what? Transformation. Learning how to live with father-like love. Learning how to engage each other with an attitude that bespeaks humility, bespeaks yearning, bespeaks meekness, bespeaks purity of heart, and leads to a quality which enables us to mourn for those who are in pain, to be merciful for those who are suffering, to be peacemakers where there is conflict, and to relish persecution. I relish persecution, don't I, Marvin? I'm an excommunicated minister. I was called into my church. I was an associate pastor, volunteer there. I was called into the church by the president of the church, who said, I Googled you. The Holy Spirit called me to Google you at 3 a.m. I said, Kathy, I think it was actually insomnia, not the Holy Spirit. But I Googled you at 3 a.m. and I saw your connection to the Urantia book. And so we went through this process. And I came down to this. I said with the pastor, really, there are only one reason why we're different here. You believe that God's love is conditional. I believe it's unconditional. And so the journey has been a journey to explore and to recover that experience through the experience of worship and developing a quality of worship, and then through the experience of service by touching each of those circles in a significant fashion. If you put those two things together, what do we have? Soul growth. One of my teachers, Thomas Berry, we call an ecologian, and Brian Swim, a cosmologist, wrote a book called The Universe Story. It's a fabulous, if you weren't reading the Urantia book, I'd say read The Universe Story. It's a fabulous display of the evolution of the universe. But in there they say there are only three principles that govern the entire universe: unity, diversity, and autopoiesis. Now I know you all get unity and diversity, but the autopoiesis may be a struggle. Auto, self, poiesis, making. We get the word poetry from poiesis. Self-making. We are all in the process of becoming our unique selves. We've each been given a gift as personalities that only we can express. We've told this in the Urantia book time and time again. And if we don't, then the Supreme goes begging. And so we have this opportunity to engage in a process of self-making. By how? By engaging the deep unity of our experience, which calls forth a quality of communion, of reciprocal and mutual. That's 29 minutes. I get one more minute. So it calls forth an experience of reciprocal and mutual communion, which were the words of Rufus Jones. And in that reciprocal and mutual communion, we experience the unity of all creation. We experience the unity of our community. And so if we want to put our house together, worship is the first button on the shirt. We like to say if you get the first button right, Carolyn, shirt goes down pretty good. Out of that unity comes diversity, the opportunities for service. And they are spectacular right now on the planet. So many ways in which to engage a world that is hurting. And out of that comes our own soul growth. And so we have, if you will, the diagnosis. The diagnosis is on page 1 of the book. It says, in the minds of mortals there is great confusion. However, I'm married to a doctor, so I'm a little more clinical. The diagnosis is delusional schizophrenia. Delusional, we don't really work with the facts very often. Schizophrenia, we're dual origin creatures. We're born of the earth, but we're destined to heaven. So there's a great deal of confusion associated with this journey. And in order to rectify this delusional schizophrenia that we're experiencing, worship and service are the prescription. Where's Leela? Leela here? Leela's the doctor. We need Dr. John Lang. Occasionally patients are not very compliant, right? They don't follow through on the prescription. So Dr. John Lang, if God were to show up tonight before you go to sleep and say, hey John, you got 20 minutes for me tomorrow morning? You would say?
Sure.
And John, while we're at it, how about 20 minutes in the afternoon?
Sure.
And John, would you be willing to take a retreat with me every now and again?
Of course.
Winner. Winner. Well, I tell my students, 543 million of years of evolutionary history, and you're all sitting in this room. You are all winners. 80 million going up to 2, and you're all sitting in this room. You hit megabucks. You're all winners. I want to thank you for the privilege of being with you tonight. I think we have an extraordinary opportunity in front of us. And if we would, in our study groups, and in our communities, and in our families, create deeper and wider circles of trust. And I've put in the back behind Steve Dreier 2 pieces of paper. One which is all about circles of trust. The other is all about worship. And it's also about a practice called Lectio Divina. I want to suggest to you, and David's heard this, that Lectio Divina is the way to approach our sacred text. Lectio Divina says you've got to do it with all of your heart, mind, body, and soul. We've done a pretty good job with our minds. We've done a pretty good job with our imaginations reading the book. But with our hearts, we respond morally to the text. And we ask, how am I to respond in this moment to what I am reading? And with our souls, we respond with the thunder of silence, the deep and abiding, unconditional love of God. Thank you.